This is going to be co-moderated by Anna and myself. Anna gave me the questions. But before we start here, just congratulations to everybody. Thank you for staying. Friday afternoon, 4:30. That's an impressive turnout. So we're not going to, this panel needs truly no introduction, I think, but what we're going to do to start is we'll start with one question. We also did not rehearse this, so none of the panelists have had time to think about their answers, so you're going to get it fresh, which I think can always be interesting. But I thought I'll give the first question, ask all of you to respond, but from your own context, right? Because you all have different contexts. And what you have represented here are you have two from academia with Wendy and Anna. You've got small with Yael. You've got small to large biotech with John, or John's sort of done everything, and large pharma, of course, with Fiona. So I think we have a really nice cross-section of people who've lived in this ecosystem. So the question is, historically, everything fails. 99 out of 100 things that are conceived of in the lab fail before they get to approval. Are we better? The science is better today than it's ever been. Are we better in terms of those odds or those statistics? So maybe I'll start with you, Wendy, and
I'm Wendy Chung. I'm, I guess, the academic, one of the academic representatives representing children, especially with rare diseases. So I don't know writ large in terms of all of pharma. You guys probably know the statistics better than I do. I do think because we're getting to things that are getting to the root cause, if you will, so not just symptom relief, but getting to the root cause from a genetic point of view. There are a lot of parameters, but if we can get in at the right time, which was said earlier, I do think we're showing much better success in terms of efficacy, safety, and I think we're going to be going forward. I think the big key to me is getting in at the right time.
And that getting in at the right time means it will take less time, or just will have a higher probability of success?
I think it'll have a higher probability of success, and the right time, I'll just be provocative and say, is sometimes even before the onset of symptoms.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we are getting better, but we still need to get much, much better. To Wendy's point, addressing the cause of the disease helps. To Fiona's point, understanding the genetics better also helps to design clinical trials in which you enroll the right patients, and you may get the outcomes that you're looking for. But still, even within the genetic diseases, as Wendy knows, there is a huge diversity even within one gene that is mutated. So to understand that diversity, to be able to address the symptoms that are specific to that gene within that diversity is still very complicated, and we still need to understand how to handle it within a clinical trial and obviously in the commercial landscape.
So Anna, actually I'm going to go to Anna next.
Oh, I'm next.
From where do you sit? Does it feel like
Yeah.
we're getting better? You're driving this whole thing to try to make it go better.
Well, the inspiration for, starting the Ladders to Cures Accelerator was really to try to bring all the members of the ecosystem together, so we, just like what we're doing today, to sort of exchange ideas in ways that might actually accelerate our path to therapies. But speaking from our sort of broad perspective, if you will, I will say that every major discovery, that anyone here has been a part of is founded on fundamental discoveries that happened in the lab, right? And so we can't possibly skip that step in order to accelerate our path to therapies. I think that's true, and I think, I'll put a plug in for sustained funding for fundamental research is really important if we're going to continue, especially now. I feel like we're in a golden era in biomedicine. We've never had more tools, as been represented by all the talks today. And so now to not have adequate funding for those fundamental sort of mechanistic studies that will enable therapies would be, of course, a grave mistake, I think. And a lot of it happens in the, not only, but a lot of it happens in the academic setting. But I think that what, from my perspective, is something that I would like to see us do better is, especially all of us here, we're sitting in Kendall Square, we have all of us around, and yet, of course, we're all busy in our own sort of domains. But if we could find ways to break some of these silos and have more communication, I think that there are many more opportunities to, meet each other where we are and learn from each other, so that maybe we can accelerate our path to discovery. So it's my hope that initiatives like this can help us get there.
So we'll come back to that. So John, you've seen everything here?
Well, I mean, in terms of probabilities and so forth, I mean, I do think that, if you integrate human genetics into an R&D effort and also have a modality which has true platform characteristics, and I'm partial to what we were able to do with RNAi, you can generate outsized success rates. And from IND to positive phase 3 results at Alnylam, we were at 62%, which is a remarkable number compared to the industry averages, which are under 10. And that is a playbook that can be used in many other examples.
So can you go back to the early days of siRNA, because Alnylam was many years in development, and those early days and the failures can you just talk a little bit about the failures in the early days? And I ask because, to your point, once you got the platform working.
Yeah, exactly. We had to fail a lot for about a decade and spend a lot of money to figure out how to ultimately get that modality to be operative. But once you get there, and it speaks a little bit to Anna's comments about the academic side of it. In our case, we took this on maybe earlier than we should have as a translational effort, but we took it on as a company and had to really figure out how to make drugs out of siRNAs. Probably would have been best done in a company in hindsight. I mean, there's things that companies do around understanding pharmaceutical properties that I think may be best done in a company, but it took a long time before it was ready for prime time.
And in that context, the translation, were you too quick or too slow to go to the clinic?
Well, I think we could have pivoted a little bit faster, but not much. The key discoveries that would have enabled us to make that pivot could have enabled us to do it a little bit earlier, but we first needed to be hit by a 2x4 when the pharma industry left the field, and so that was helpful.
Okay, maybe we'll come back to that serendipity. So Fiona, you manage more programs than anybody here.
If you look at the total number of drugs getting approved every year, it's not going up, and a lot more money is being spent. So there's something missing really from that point of view. I think there's several things here. One is we do have an incredible opportunity because we've got all these incredible tools, thanks to companies like Alnylam of sticking with them and getting them the tools to work. So I think most targets now are druggable by one of the modalities that we have. I think, Wendy, you're absolutely right. We're much better at safety. There's less attrition through safety because we're much better at understanding that and predicting it. But I think we are trying to do much more difficult things than when I first started doing symptomatic treatment. We really are trying to get to the heart and the cause of disease, and even really trying to get a cure if possible, but certainly long-term remission or drugs that can really change your life so that you can forget about your disease. This is a high bar, and so it's good. We're all pushing ourselves, but I think what we need more of, what worries me a bit, is that a lot of these new tools are just going back to the same old targets that we sort of drugged already. And sometimes there's a benefit of coming with a new modality, but I think where there's a real opportunity for the academic research and institutes like the Broad and the work you do is coming up with those new, completely new targets, new approaches that we haven't drugged before.
So are we technology deficient or target deficient?
I would say target deficient.
Others?
Wendy, go ahead.
No, I'm just nodding voraciously because the frustration that I have is what I call too rare to care. So there are just so many, literally thousands of conditions that are really not commercially viable. They're too rare and they're too hard right now. And so instead what I see is companies go after the things that'll be incrementally better because there's already the market. Patients have already been identified. There's something that is softening in terms of that, whereas we're not really making the inroads into the tough problems. But once we make the inroads, I am optimistic that we'll be able to, like a step function, step up and bring a bunch of conditions with us. But I am worried that, as you said, we're going after the same things over and over again.
But it's interesting, as you translate things and understand the genetics better, it becomes smaller, right? Because so if you treat diabetes, you still don't really understand why people develop diabetes. You have hypothesis, you may know some genes, but you're not treating the genetic cause of it, you're treating the symptoms. As you go smaller and smaller to the too rare to care, you understand the biology better, but it becomes too small, and how do you tackle that? I'd like to challenge you, Fiona, and next year when you publish your report, and you're starting it with renal diseases, publish how many new patients did you treat with disorders that have never had a treatment before. And if that incentivizes you, then maybe you'll be more caring about rare.
Well, I was going to take the discussion in a slightly different direction in the sense of, yes, I think it's targets that we're missing. And maybe, us academics, we tend to research targets in our labs, right? And we do work to try to understand those targets. But oftentimes, we don't do that with a view of what Fiona needs or what John or needs in order to develop a program. Maybe because we have never been part of that process, justifiably so. But I'm curious, and this is very future-looking, and I don't know what the answer will be, but I'm interested in, many of our colleagues here, we're thinking about ways in which we can use machine learning and AI to try to understand, paths to targets better. And one of the thoughts that I have is, can we imagine, this is my sort of, dream about sort of the R&D engine of the future, which actually combines someone like me who works in the lab, or any one of our colleagues who work in the lab, with a co-pilot who never forgets anything about they've ever read in the literature, right? And can help you do hypothesis-driven work like we do, but without really forgetting any of the facts that you knew from before, and papers that you have read before and that you have seen. Can we imagine combining those tools and having a co-pilot that can lead us to more better testable hypotheses, which of course would have to be adjudicated in the lab. I'm not saying this in a vacuum. I actually have discussions with my colleagues at DeepMind about this all the time, and there is a world in which this is not really just a vision, but it's actually something that can become a reality. But now you can imagine combining that with what I call biology at scale, which a lot of it we do here, which is testing multiple hypotheses at scale rather than one by one, like when I was a grad student. So if you combine biology at scale with a scientific co-pilot who never forgets anything, maybe there's a way in which we can get to better target ID faster. That's what I'm dreaming about. I'm not sure if it will be possible, but I would love to be a part of that journey.
So let's dig on that just a little bit. But in the context of rare, okay, AI and, of course, drug discovery writ large is maybe a bigger topic, but the role of AI, machine learning in rare, is that going to open things up in a way that's a step function?
Well, I think it's... I think we have to sort of make sure we're out of the hype cycle with AI, and I think it is mostly step function, important, super important. I think we're far away from a day. Demi had some interesting comments on 60 Minutes and talked about curing all diseases within a short period of time. I love that, but I think it'll be a little bit longer than a short time. And we're still far away from being able to, type in a disease of interest into a computer and have it spit out a small molecule that you ought to synthesize to treat that disease. We're still a little bit away from that, realistically. And part of the reason is biology is really complicated. And the model systems that are used do not necessarily do all the experiments the right way. We have to feed biology with the right experiments to ultimately inform models at the end.
And to that point, does that make rare one of sort of at the lower part of the list as opposed to larger diseases with more data that would drive perhaps more informative AI use?
I think you just have the power of genetics that's so powerful with rare that I think it, informs a better set of hypotheses than what you have in larger complex diseases. That's my view. I don't know.
I can just add, we're developing therapies, genetic therapies for neurodevelopmental disorders. I'm trying to think if there's a time in the development process that we went through that I felt that I needed more information or AI help. And at the moment, I will say no. But I don't know what I don't know, so maybe I'm wrong.
I'm a bit more of a fan of AI, and we are using it really across all of the pieces of work that we do. So I think one thing in the context of rare is much better diagnosis of diseases earlier on. So people who don't have access to have whole genome sequencing, I think that where you can already start to see AI very good is diagnostic of rare diseases. And so that's one area, I think. And then that goes to also then some of the biomarkers where AI can help with imaging, for example, and reading scans and subdividing what we thought was one disease into 5 diseases. So it turns out what you thought was a common disease actually is made up of lots of rare diseases. AI is very good at doing that, and we've already seen a number of publications there, for example. Designing molecules, we're working with isomorphic. So that's another area where we're showing, and also predictive safety. And then in trial design, we're using a lot of AI to design the trials. What you can do is look at all the different parameters of a protocol of how you recruit people into a trial and how changing those parameters will alter the rate of recruitment. And so that hopefully is one of the ways you can really speed up clinical development.
Okay. So I'm going to go back to the community here, but I want to start with, so should Children's, the Broad, and Novartis all be doing the same thing? And the scientists, right? I mean, Novartis writ large is doing things different, but at the research level, is the research lab at Children's, Novartis, and the Broad, are those?
No question, we should not be doing the same things. We're each good at different things, right? But on the other hand, to the points that were made earlier, it's kind of ridiculous. We're in 20 minutes from each other, right? But how often do we get together in terms of actually brainstorming and figuring out our synergies and what we could do collectively together? Unfortunately, not very often. But we clearly have different strengths and weaknesses. Maybe we'll go into them, but there are people that are close to the patients, and the people that are close to the patients ultimately know what are the critical factors in terms of what are the unmet needs, what are the pressure points, how do you find patients, recruit patients, how do you design a trial that they'll actually do and be able to comply with, what's reasonable in terms of this, and at the end of the day, what matters most to them in terms of an outcome measure for the FDA. So, you need the clinicians who really know these conditions extremely well. On the other hand, I can say, and this is somewhat self-serving and maybe an unabashed advertisement, Children's and the Broad clearly realize that we are complementary, and so we're strategically partnering to be able to put these pieces together and to know that some of the technologies, some of the scalability that's here is going to get us there faster. And so it's clear that we should be partnering. And then, we would love to be able to partner with whether it's Novartis or, quite honestly, anyone else who wants to come to the party, because we just have too much work to be done. I'm sitting in the hospital and I've got 200 kids with rare genetic diseases that desperately need treatments. And so anyone who wants to come to the party, come on over.
So Fiona,
I think that all working on the same problems is a good thing, because you actually want different perspectives and different approaches to tackle the same problems. I think we're more likely to get success when we are thinking about a problem together and then coming at it from different directions, bringing our different types of expertise. And even doing the same experiment in different places is actually pretty useful. It just builds that credibility, and certainly, if you've done an experiment and you see somebody else doing it, you actually feel more confident about the results. So I don't think duplicating is necessarily a bad thing, but of course there are different strengths in different labs, and then how we can carry on working together. I think this is one, and sharing the expertise where we need it. Especially, I think what we're not good at is sharing the expertise of when things haven't worked very well. We tend to share the successes and celebrate them, which is great, but we don't always share the learnings of the failures very well. So the same mistakes get made over and over again, and that's what I think is very wasteful in the work that we're doing. We don't have time to all be making the same mistakes over and over again.
So this next question skirts a little bit on that, and maybe we'll come back and try to put a bow around the need to work together. It probably doesn't require much of a bow. John, how important is the business model here for the rare disease?
I think it's hugely important, and I wish it weren't, but it really is. And for example, I think until we have more commercial successes with some of these therapeutic approaches, we could see, many, many very, very promising treatments and cures not ever get funded. And I think, unfortunately, that reward system is super important to support the investment that's needed. Even for small, rare diseases, it's still a significant investment that's needed. And if there's no meaningful reward system, then people will just stop, investors will just stop putting money behind it. So it is a big concern of mine, because it would be a tragedy. I mean, many of the modalities, gene therapy, gene editing, and so forth, are cures. And will we get to a point where society says we can't fund cures anymore because they're too expensive, or whatever the case might be, or we want to create obstacles around their adoption and so forth? That would be a tragedy. That would really be a tragedy.
I'd like to put a plug in for parents as well. Lisa, are you still here? Lisa Manister from the CACNA 1A Foundation. Patients are doing it. They're not waiting for us anymore. And we cannot ignore it. And what's happening now is that once there was no cure, no therapy, no option, now foundations are patient advocacy groups are funding research, moving things closer to the clinic, moving the bottleneck to the clinical studies, but still there's no one that will pick them up and help them commercialize it. So to John's point, as a society, as a community, it's our responsibility to help these therapies get to market, because they work, they will make a difference in families' lives, and we need a way to fund these and to get these to patients.
What did we learn from yesterday's case, and how do we extrapolate from there? The KJ case everybody was talked about earlier, N of 1.
Wendy, you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say cautious, but optimism, right? I mean, it's very early days in terms of this. It's sort of, I can't tell you, my email box has exploded over the last 24 hours in terms of it feels like thousands of patients I've ever treated all saying, is this going to work for me and when? So there's hope, which is, I think, incredibly important for the community. On the other hand, there is this measure of realism we need to have so that people don't have unrealistic expectations. It is, and I would love to have anyone in this room who can help us think about this, because I do think that just if you think about an editing technology, there are enough editors now to take care of the majority of mutations, at least DNA sequence mutations. The problem in part is delivery and safety and long-term knowing about the durability, and if we can get to saturation in terms of the cells that we're trying to target, in the brain in particular, that's hard in terms of being able to know that we're going to get to enough of them. So I can think of about, a couple dozen sort of combinatorial problems you need to solve, that if you could solve all of those, and I know that's a lot, but if you could solve all of those, you can actually think about 10,000 rare genetic diseases that within the next whatever period of time are potentially treatable if you can diagnose them and treat them early enough. It gets to the point, as I think about that with scalability, how much does it cost for each of those? Will the FDA and other regulators will get to a point where you can literally dial in the sequence for the guides, and you're going to have the same manufacturing technology for delivery systems, and we'll know enough about that safety to be able to bring the cost of goods down significantly? I don't know, but I would love to be able to, before I retire, I've given myself that, I give that 20 years for any of you who care. We've got 20 years to be able to get this done.
Are they learning? So the only thing I would comment about that, it was heroic. I mean, anybody reading that, one. Two, it was incredible, the willingness of the different parties. So multiple, 5, I don't know how many different parties had to step in to make that happen, and happen in a short period of time. There is no business model for that. That's not scalable, what happened yesterday, which is why most of these emails will go without the hope being fulfilled. But it clearly falls in that realm of, if any group, wherever the line is that it is too small, needs a collective effort. And my impression of government, putting aside our current state, but in general, is I think we need to present ourselves to the government in a way that says, we have the solution, we're just missing the funds. They pay one way or another, it's, depending on where you are in the system. But if you could organize the rare disease world in a way that said, there's a super fund for this kind of thing. I mean, those kind of things can be done, but they get created when they become real. They don't, nobody creates a super fund around an idea. It needs to have a certain level of tangibility, so.
I mean, for me, the hospitals are actually the key here. The leading children's hospitals, I mean, in the UK, Great Ormond Street and Boston Children's Hospital, who see these newborn patients, and if you can get the diagnosis quite quickly and have the funds to provide the technology, which if it's like all optimized, so it's an efficient system that maybe you've actually got in the hospital. I don't see this as a pharma type of commercial opportunity at all, but I think there could be a lot of other creative ways centered around hospitals. I mean, you talked about surgery as an equivalent, but it should be a service that a hospital, specialized hospital, can provide that is part of the, comes with whether it's the insurance or the hospital, but we pay for other healthcare interventions, and this should just be one of those, in my view. It saves money in the long run. This is the thing. I mean, so if you actually do the economics of how much it would take to care for many of these children, it's worth it.
It's a good point. Yeah, the only thing I want to add to this is, and again, building on what Wendy also said, I mean, this is the place where David Liu conceived of a lot of these editors, CRISPR, Feng Zhang, of course, here at the Broad. So we feel like we have a unique role to play in partnership with children's, for example, and we've actually formalized this. It's always about the people. Wendy and I got together, and the teams got together, and we found that there's a lot of opportunity. So it's just the beginning, but it speaks a little bit to what I said earlier in the day about, like maybe we can think about this as a nodal technology or a platform, programmable therapeutics that are, you don't reinvent the wheel every which time for every mutation, but rather you find the commonalities, the nodes, and you harness them to develop these therapies. But of course, the business model or how one funds something like this, and whether there's a super fund or philanthropy that plays a role in this, remains to be explored. But maybe this, to bring it back, is in some ways why we have to all get together and brainstorm about these things, because it's not going to come from, not sort of being as part of a dialogue and bringing all the stakeholders together for how we're going to, eventually achieve these goals, whether it's for more common rare diseases like the ones that Fiona is working on, or whether it's more of these sort of like N of a few, if you will, to help a few children who are waiting. So
maybe it's 4:25. Maybe that's a good place to end on. The biggest challenge for rare is rare, and you got to deal with the numbers, and collectively is often the best way to do that. So, thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, this is going to be very short in terms of closing our day. Thank you, each and every one of you. And I know there's many of you, probably hundreds of you online from what I hear. So thank you all for being here with us today. It was a wonderful day of exchange of ideas. I hope that we were able to celebrate some of the recent successes of these early seed programs that the Ladder Cures Accelerator has been advancing. There's much, much more to do, of course, but we're hoping to grow this initiative, develop relationships with everyone in the ecosystem. So to each and every one of you, thank you, and see you next time. Have a good evening.